I am a sex educator, and so to begin, I'm going to share with you some of the details of my first time. Not the first time I had sex, but the first equally embarrassing, awkward experience of having to teach it. Just to give you some context, I did not grow up dreaming of becoming a sex educator. My PhD is in social psychology. About 6 years ago, however, the professor who had been teaching sex education for the past 30 years fell and broke her leg. I had been a teaching assistant for this professor for many, many years, and so she decided to recommend that I take her place. I guess I was pregnant at the time, so I think everyone just kind of assumed that I knew just at least the basics of sex. So, how was my first time? It was not great. I had a textbook, but it was kind of biased, and like most human sexuality textbooks nowadays, it tended to categorize things as being either normal or as gone awry. But I used this textbook as a shield. Anytime students would come to me and explain that their experiences did not fit inside what this textbook was explaining, I would defend myself and explain that I had a duty to emphasize only that information which the majority of research showed. Furthermore, I would explain that I couldn't possibly fit every student's perspective into one course. Basically, students were not so receptive to this idea. They were a little bit bored, to say the best. At worst, they would feel shut down, misrepresented. Adding to the complexity of my problem is the fact that there is no federally mandated sex education in this country. As a result, some students are coming to my class knowing a lot about sex, whereas others are coming knowing virtually nothing. There are only 24 states in the United States that require that sex education be taught in middle or high school. And shockingly, Washington State is not one of those states. Of those 24 states, only 12 require that it even be medically accurate. Is this 2019? So whereas some students come in knowing a tremendous amount about sex, others come in knowing virtually nothing at all. In addition to this, there's a very wide range of reasons that students have for taking this class. According to my most recent anonymous poll, here are some of the most common reasons given. To explore my sexuality. To be a better partner in the bedroom. To learn more about my body and the bodies of others. To learn about LGBTQ issues. I've heard that this clicker likes to be touched in a very special way, which, as a sex educator, I have to respect. There we go. See, it just to learn about gender identity and transgender issues. To feel educated and empowered. To have better sex. To learn about porn. I'm just tired of being clueless. And then, perhaps not as common, but my personal favorite, to gain sex techniques so that I may please my girlfriend, perhaps even causing her to transcend her physical form and enter a nirvana of pleasure. How do you teach a class? Just such a wide range of students, where some are there to defend their most personally held beliefs, and others are so timid they can barely make eye contact, where they clearly want to engage, but they aren't sure how or whether they can even trust you. I had no idea, but at a certain point, I realized I needed to make a change. The first thing I did was throw out this textbook that I was using. that obviously had an ability to make students feel unaccepted and unheard and felt non-representative. Instead, I decided to write my own content over the next 2 quarters. Next, I found a co-author, and we decided to write our own textbook. We wanted it to be current and present the most cutting-edge research, but we also wanted it to be non-biased. We wanted to eradicate shame and to eliminate stigma. We also wanted it to be online so that we could take advantage of the most current, cutting-edge learning technologies, and also so that we could make edits and modifications quite easily. Next, I encouraged my students to think of my class as a collaboration. This required that I admit to them that I'm not perfect, that I make mistakes, that I may not have the whole story, at least in a way that made perfect sense to them. More specifically, I started encouraging them to come to me, to present to me their ideas, to tell me exactly how they saw the world. And I told them that if they were to come to me with ideas and we could dig into the research and we could explore them and we could really see how they applied, if they had ideas for how we could then incorporate that into the text or incorporate it into the lectures, that I would consider it. In essence, my class kind of became more like Wikipedia. Or, some might say, Sexopedia, an evidence-based, cutting-edge version of Sexopedia. So, how have my students responded to this? Well, I have some wonderful stories to share with you. For example, I had a student last quarter who came to me wanting to incorporate more context behind issues related to gender nonconformity. I could tell that she was nervous, apprehensive, and expecting to be shut down. Instead, I told her how excited I was that she had brought this to me. I encouraged her to dig into the research, to expand her thinking about this, to come back to me with something written, something thought out, that we could then use to reframe how that particular material was presented in the course. Her response? Astonishment, elation. She thanked me. She told me that no professor ever before had asked her to contribute her own ideas to a course in such a meaningful way. I think that my approach to Sexopedia, sex education, is probably consistent with another trend going on in this country right now, which you may or may not have heard of, called sex positivity. As opposed to historically normal human sexuality classes, which tend to emphasize all of the risks and things that you should be ashamed of and talk about sexuality in really stigmatizing terms, sex positivity acknowledges these risks, but it also celebrates all of the wonderful things that sex has to offer. It explains sexual pleasure. It talks about the benefits of healthy sexual relationships. And it acknowledges that our sexuality feeds into the very core of our self-identity. However, I believe that in order to be truly sex positive, sex education has to be empowering to the student. In this way, this traditional boundary or line that comes between the professor and the student shifts a little bit. No longer is it a one-way exchange, but rather, students begin to take a role in educating the professor. It becomes a conversation. Ideas from students who are usually often on the cutting edge of what is happening within a topic that is so central nowadays in people's lives starts to matter, starts to get incorporated, starts to be built into the student experience. I think that social psychology has a lot of evidence that shows us that when people are in positive moods compared to negative moods, they tend to open up their minds. They tend to think more positively in a way that allows them to connect two different thoughts that may not immediately be obviously linked. It allows people to think more open-mindedly, because ironically, one of the things that happens when the professor and the student start communicating, when the student is put on top, is that people's defenses come down. They begin to listen to your perspective, as well as to the other many perspectives that are around them. What this has taught me is that although I think dominant and submissive roles may have some wonderful experiences in other sexual contexts, in the classroom, it's an epic fail. So, what has my Sexopedia approach to sex education taught me? It's taught me that sometimes the best way to open up someone's mind about your own point of view is to let them first explain theirs, to ask them questions, to dig in, to ask them to expand, and to acknowledge that in every idea, no matter how crazy, no matter how out there, there is usually at least a nugget of truth that can be incorporated into your own point of view, used to reframe how you explain another concept, that allows you to make linkages to ideas that you never even considered. More specifically, how has Sexopedia impacted my own class? Well, the class used to have 300 students a quarter. It now has 720, which is limited only by the size of Kane 130. It used to be taught 2 quarters a year. Now it's taught 3. Over the past couple of quarters, the average course evaluations have been 5 out of 5. I think that my sex-positive Sexopedia approach to sex education may really be resonating with students. I think it's important for students to understand that they are a part of their learning process. I feel so incredibly grateful to interact with the amazing array of students that I do every day. They have taught me, they have helped me to grow, they have led me to consider ideas that I would have never considered before. So to all of my students who may be sitting here today, either in past courses, present, or maybe in future courses, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for truly making me a better person. Thank you, and see you in class.
That was great.